Hi everyone, in this video let's discuss about Ind AS 108 operating segment, a simple and easy standard. So let's begin with it. We are going to identify the operating segment, then we are going to determine the reportable segment, which is based on the aggregation and criteria and the quantitative threshold criteria. We are going to disclose certain information with respect to general information and information about the profit or loss and assets and liabilities, and also we are going to measure the reconciliation items and restatement of previously reported items, and we are going to give an entity-wide disclosure with respect to the information about the product and services, geographical areas, and information about the major customers. Okay, let's go and understand the crux of the standard. That is a core principle. An entity shall disclose information to enable the use of the financial statements to evaluate the nature and effects of the business activities in which it is engaging and the economic environment in which it is operating. So this segment information is going to give me the idea about the nature and financial effects of the business and also the economic environment. That's an important point we are going to be noted here. If an entity that is not required to apply this in this is going to apply, going to report some information as a separate disclosure, but it's also not following the principle of Ind AS 108, then such information should not be titled as segment information. Then, if a financial report contains both the consolidated financial statement and the separate financial statement of a parent, then this Ind AS 108 will be applicable only to the consolidated financial statement and not the separate financial statement. Now, going to identify what is a reportable segment. We have to check whether three conditions are cumulatively satisfied. Okay, first one is that whether the component we have already discussed in SA 600, right, which means a branch, division, associate, subsidiary, joint venture, or any such similar cases, right? So whether the component is engaged in a business activity, there should be a business activity which is going to generate him a revenue or where it is going to incur an expense. Okay, if it is yes, then we are going to check whether the component's results are regularly reviewed by CODM, that is Chief Operating Decision Maker. For example, it could be a CFO, CEO, COO, or any other person in similar designation, okay, or similar function. And then if all two conditions are satisfied, then you have to check the third condition, whether this discrete financial information is being available for that particular component. If all the three conditions are satisfied, then it will be calling it as an operating segment. If either of the conditions is not satisfied, then we will not call it as an operating segment. Let's repeat. Is the component engaged in business activities from which it may earn revenue and incur expenses, and the component's results regularly reviewed by a CODM? Is the discrete financial information for that component available? If all the three conditions are satisfied, then it will be known as operating segment. If none of the conditions is satisfied or none of the conditions is not satisfied, then it will not be an operating segment. Then the term CODM, that is Chief Operating Decision Maker, would mean the person with the functions and not the designation, mere designation. Okay. For example, it could be a person with the CFO level or CEO level, CEO level, or a group of executive directors or others. Okay. Here also there are some important points. One is that the operating segment may engage in business activity which is yet to earn revenue, but there is a revenue potential, but it's yet to generate revenue. For example, it could be a new business, okay, for which currently there is no revenue, but there is a potential of earning revenue. The entity's post-employment benefit plans are not operating segment. For example, a trust is being created for the post-employment benefits, then such trust will not be an operating segment. If the CODM is more than one set of segment information, other factors may identify a single set of components as constituting an entity's operating segment, like the nature of business activities, the existence of manager responsible for them, and information presented to the board of directors. For example, there is more than one set of information which is going to be reviewed for a particular segment. And how are we going to determine the operating segment? For that, they are giving a clarification. Then you can go by the way of nature of business or existence of manager responsible, or you can go based on information which is going to be presented to the board of directors. Yeah. If the characteristics for identifying more than or apply more than one set of components, I'm going to apply same criteria for more than one set of components, then it is saying that go based on these segments where the managers are there with the responsibilities. Okay, now Here again, like we had CODM, segment managers also by function and not by designation, that is title alone. Okay, so he's like it's a position where he is directly reportable to the CODM, that is one level below the CODM. But in some cases, when the branches of high importance or divisions of high importance, the CODM can himself be a segment manager. Now, let's understand what is a report segment. Okay, an entity should report separately the information. So those for those operating segments that are classified as a reportable operating segments, the information, the financial information has to be disclosed separately. Okay, what is the condition? Two conditions are there, and it's a cumulative condition again. Identifying as an operating segment based on above criteria, we've identified it as an operating segment, or two or more components have been aggregated using the aggregation criteria. We are going to discuss it. Okay, so just wait for a few minutes. Okay, then and such amount exceeds the quantitative threshold. Okay, now even if I want, there could be some cases where separate information can be reported based on the standard. Okay. Now, what is the process of the standard? The first step is to identify the CODM, okay, chief operating decision maker. For example, it could be a COO, CEO, and etc. And second step is to identify the operating segment based on three criteria, right? One is it should generate revenue or incur expenses where the business activities are there. Second one, such report should be regularly reviewed by the CODM. And third criteria is that has a discrete set of financial information. Okay, then the third step is that to determine the reportable operating segment, we had two conditions. One is that we have identified as an operating segment or it has been identified using a aggregation criteria. And second one is that it exceeds the quantitative threshold. And four, once I have determined the reportable operating segments, then such financial information belonging to that reportable operating segments has to be disclosed to the use of the financial statement. Now, let's understand the aggregation criteria. Two or more operating segments may be aggregated into one operating segment if all the conditions are satisfied. Okay, what are the conditions? First one is the aggregation is consistent with the core principle of Ind AS. That is, core principle is that I have to make my users understand this is an important segment of my business. Okay, as a core principle, right? The second one is that the segment have similar economic characteristics. For example, all the segments, all the branches are there in Indian economy, but then it has similar economic environment. Third one is that the segment are similar. Similar means same type in respect to the nature of products and services, the nature of production process, the type of class or customers is being dealing into, the methods of distribution, and the nature of the regulatory environment in which it is operating. Okay, these are the things which we have to be considered by applying the aggregation criteria. Now, moving on to the quantitative threshold criteria, we have to check whether the reported revenue, both external and internal sales of an operating segment is 10% or more of the combined revenue of all operating segments. We have to check whether the revenue which is there, that is revenue of the branch is 10% or more of the gross revenue of the in the disclosed in the financial statements. Okay, then if it's S, move on, report as an operating segment. Okay, if it's a no, check whether the absolute amount, so absolute amount means signs should be ignored. Okay, that is profit, both profit and loss will be taken, only the amounts will be taken. Okay, 10% or more of the greater in the absolute amount of the combined profit or profit of all operating segments and combined loss. Okay, let's have an example here. Okay, here we have four divisions. Division 1 earns 1000 rupees profit. Division 2 earns 200 rupees profit. Division 3 incurs a loss of 100. And Division 4 incurs a loss of 1200. The total profit here is 1200. Total loss is 1300. Okay. We have to check the greater in absolute amount. In absolute amount which is greater, total loss is greater, right? Greater of the two is 1300. Now we have to apply to each. Okay. 1000 divided by 1300, 77%. 200 divided by 1300, 15%. 100 divided by 1300, 7.7%. 1200 divided by 1300, 92%. Now, which all are greater than 10% or more? Division 1, Division 2, and Division 4. So, these three divisions are to be reported as an operating segment. Okay, clear? Understood? Now, let's move on to the next criteria. Whether the assets are 10% or more of the combined assets of all the segments. Whether the management believes that the information about the segment would be useful to the statement. For example, it is a material information. For example, the new division or new component has been started during the year. That is not exceeding any of the conditions or not fulfilling any of the conditions, even then there is an information which is useful, it is material to use of the financial statement. That's why I'm going to disclose it as a separate operating segment. If none of these conditions are satisfied, then you have to not report it as a operating segment. Now, overall determination of reportable operating segments based on the management reporting system. Do some operating segments meet all aggregation criteria? Yes. Aggregate segments if desired. Okay. If it is no, do some operating segments meet the quantitative threshold? If it is meeting the quantitative thresholds, then you may these are the reportable segments to be disclosed. Okay. If it is not, then do some operating segments need a majority of the aggregation criteria? Majority of whether it is meeting the criteria. If yes, then aggregate and report it. Okay. Do identified reportable segments account for 75% of the revenue? You have to check whether it is accounting for 75% of the gross revenue. But then you can report it as a reportable segment. Okay, see, none of the criteria is satisfied. Okay, but if I check okay, some three together, okay, then it is making 75% of the gross revenue. Then you can report it as a reportable segment. Segment if external revenue of all segment is less than 75% of the entity's revenue. Aggregate remaining segments into all other segments category. Report additional segment if external revenue of all segment is less than 70% of revenue. This report all additional segments. The additional segments have to be reported if external revenue of all segment is less than 75%. See, 75% of entity revenue is there. Okay, it's not meeting that criteria also. Then I'm checking whether it is meeting 75% of the entity's revenue. At least the external revenue is less than then. Okay, then I will aggregate all others. I will report these and aggregate all others into all other segments category. Okay, let's repeat it again once. Do some operating segments meet all aggregation criteria? If it is an yes, go with aggregation and check whether it meets quantitative threshold. If it is yes, then report it. Okay. Threshold criteria is also not met. Then you check whether majority means the aggregation criteria. Okay. Then okay, you can aggregate and report it. Okay. Also check identified reportable segment account for 75% of the entity's revenue. Check whether it is accounting for 75% of the entity's revenue. If it is yes, okay. If it is no, or additionally report, I have to meet 75%, right? So additionally report those where if the external revenue of all segment is less than 75% of the entity's revenue. Okay, I have to report only if the external revenue of all segment is less than 75% of the entity's revenue. If that is also not satisfied, then I will proceed with aggregating the other things into all other segments category. Okay, now let's move on to the next points. Okay, information about two or more operating segments that do not meet the quantitative thresholds may be combined to produce a reportable segment only if the operating segments have similar economic criteria and share the majority aggregation criteria. You already understood this, right? Based on the management judgment, the information about the immediate preceding period reportable operating segment shall continue to be reported separately in the current period, even if it no longer meets the criteria for reportability. It is about the upon the management's judgment. Okay. If the new operating segment is identified as a reportable segment in the current period in accordance with the quantitative threshold, segment data for the prior period presented for comparative purposes shall be restated if applicable. I am going to insert a new segment as a reportable segment during the current year. Then, if I am having the prior period data for it, I have to restate the prior period comparative information if it is practically possible. Generally, it will be practically possible. Now, disclosure. An entity shall disclose for each period for which a statement of profit or loss is presented. What are things, general information like factors used to identify. What are the things I have used as considered as factors? Then judgments made like aggregation criteria, brief description of the operating segments that have been aggregated and the economic indicators that have been addressed to. Types of products and services which each reportable segment derives its revenue. What are the types of products and services? These are the general information. Information about the reported segments, profit or loss, including specified revenue and expenses included in the profit and loss account, segment assets, segment liability, and basis of measurement. The third one would be reconciliation of total segment revenues, reported segment profit or loss, segment assets and segment liability, and other material segments items to corresponding entity amounts. I'm going to start as a percentage. Okay, like this is how so and so percentage of the entities. amount. Okay. Now, measure of profit or loss for each reportable segment. An entity shall report a measure of total assets and liabilities for each reportable segment if such amounts are regularly provided to the CODM. Generally, CODM will review the profit or loss. So I'm going to disclose it as such. Okay. If the CODM is also going to review the assets and liabilities, I'll also give the percentage of that to the use of the financial statements. So it is fully based on the perspective of the CODM. Okay. Not from accounting process. It is basically from the perspective like how the CODM will view the results of the particular component. Okay. Now, measurement. The amount of each segment item reported should be reported to CODM for the purpose of decision making about allocating the resource to a segment and about assessing this performance. Adjustments and adaptations made in preparing the entity's financial statement are included in the measure of reporting of segments items only if that is used by CODM. If CODM uses only one measure, then that measure shall be used for reporting operating segment. However, if CODM uses more than one measure, then reported measures should be those that are consistent with those used in measuring corresponding amounts of the entity's financial statements. Okay. If, for example, I measure using the sales, then it's fine. You can do it. Okay. Now, some other thing is being measured, then I have to mention it as a note that I'm going to, the CODM is using this also for assessing the performance and allocating the resources to the segment. Now, reconciliation. An entity shall provide a reconciliation following all these reconciliation, all the 5 reconciliations have to be provided. The total reportable segments revenue to the entity revenue. Assume it is about 80% have been reported, then that has to be shown. Total of the reported measures of profit or loss, the entity's profit or loss before tax and discontinued operation. Then reportable segments asset to the entity's asset. Reportable segment liability to the entity's liability. Reportable segments amounts for every material item of the information disclosed to the corresponding amount of the entity. If I'm going to use some other measure, I'm going to give that as a note, right? For that also, I should measure the percentage to the entity's amount. All material reconciliation items shall be separately identified and described. Okay, I have to mention separately and describe about it. Other information to be disclosed. An entity should report the following geographical information if possible. This is about geographical, okay, which means about the location, based on location. Revenue from the external customer attributing to countries, entity's country of domicile, which means where the permanent place of business. There is a fixed staff. The head office is there. Okay, attributed to all foreign currency in total from which the entity derives the revenue. Okay, so first domestic and then foreign revenue. Okay, then non-current assets other than financial instruments, deferred tax, post-employment benefits located in entities. Non-current assets located here domestic and in foreign countries. Okay, then if revenue from transactions with a single customer amount to 10% of the more of the entity's revenue, the entity should disclose the fact, the total amount of revenue from each such customer, identify the segment or the segments reporting the revenue. See, what's that means, right? For example, ABC Limited is the reporting entity. Okay, it has one customer known as F Limited. Okay, that F Limited is, I'm selling goods which is equal to 15% of my gross revenue to that particular customer. Then I have to disclose the information that I'm selling 15% goods worth 15% of my total revenue to this particular F Limited. Okay, and also the total amount of revenue in numbers, and also identify which segment it belongs, whether it may be a segment of maybe a segment of FMCG. Okay, like that. Okay, but this operating segment standard comes to an end. Thank you so much. If you really like this video and find it useful, please do hit the like button and also share with your friends and subscribe for better reach. Thank you so much.